I'm ready to go.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, let's do it. All right, so we are jumping the gun by seconds here, but welcome to the ultimate question. Usually, I introduce the ultimate question, but there's a lot of different things about this particular episode. The first one is you might notice that the backdrop is different, and you might notice that there's no split screen here. Celia is here with me in my living room, all the way from around the world, from Australia, I guess. I mean, that's where you're from, but you're kind of everywhere all the time. And so, in spirit of the difference here, we're going to switch things up. And Celia, I would love for you to introduce what the ultimate question is.
Yeah. Well, yesterday someone asked me, so what is this podcast you're going on LinkedIn? I'm like, well, it's a podcast with a very distinct difference because it's based around a mystery question that you don't get to know what it is until you are streaming live. So you're really put on the spot. So it's really different than other podcasts, let's say, Diary of a CEO or whatever. That's one of my favorites, where, there'll be some curveball questions for the guest eventually, but those will be based on the conversation that's been building up. Whereas with this, it starts with the curveball question and it doesn't have any context. So it's quite tricky.
Yeah, this was an interesting question to find, because if you can't tell, Celia and I know each other really well. We've known each other very intimately for over 5 years now. And it was a really different process of welcoming the question in, because it's not a question that I want to ask necessarily, and it's not about pulling out all of your beautiful knowledge. So yeah, we're about to dive into that. And before we do, I'm going to ask you, and I can also do this first if that makes sense, but to introduce yourself with two to three surprising things about who you are.
Yeah, so that's even interesting in itself, that question. What are 2 or 3 surprising things about you? Because it's a hard question to ask, because I don't know what's surprising about me. Nothing's surprising. Oh, that's not true. It's not true to say nothing's surprising to me about me, but I usually get surprised and then forget what surprised me. But other people have said to me in the past that they have been surprised to learn, for example, that I lived in Japan for a decade. That's surprising. Some people have told me in the past they're surprised to learn that I grew up on a farm. I was a little farm girl.
I was definitely surprised by that.
Yeah.
I was not surprised about Japan, because that's where we met.
Obviously, you wouldn't be surprised about Japan. Other people are surprised about Japan.
Yeah.
And I often get a surprised reaction from people as well when they find out that I am a digital nomad. People get quite confused about the concept of not having a base. Like, where do you live? Where do you belong? Where can I place you? Right?
Yeah.
That's a difficult thing for some people. They're like, oh, I don't know how to place you. I don't know where to think about you. So yeah. That's something that comes up a lot.
And obviously, to learn more about what Celia does, you can check over on her LinkedIn profile, and there'll be a link here at the end of the show. As for me, in terms of what's surprising for me, well, I think it's a little bit surprising that this is my living room. This is a very intimate space with things that are very close to me. So I'm going to just use those things as my surprising things. This is actually from Japan.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Love this.
Yeah, I really love that too. And then the quilt behind me is something that my mom made.
Mommy.
Yeah. So surprising things that are both about me, of me, and kind of not about me at all.
Oh, look, we've got quite a global audience here. Vienna, Ecuador.
Yeah.
Hi, Regina. Hi, Laurie.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. And now is the time to actually open your question.
This is my envelope. Look at this beautiful seal as well. This wax seal. I just love it. So good. So I've always wondered about this moment. I've watched a couple of other episodes of this, and I've always thought how awkward and funny it would be if someone really badly paper cut themselves and couldn't answer their ultimate question because they were in too much pain. Oh, this is such a great one. I knew you did not disappoint. I knew it was going to be something like this. Do I read it out? The question is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What a question. Are you expecting me to answer that now?
This is all you. You get to drive.
I love this question. For me personally, what I would do if I wasn't afraid, one thing for sure is, and I'm working on this for 2025, one thing for sure is that in my content, I would talk about more personal things. Because in my content now, I mean, I certainly do sometimes, I will often talk about details about myself, but it's usually really relevant to what I'm talking about in a business context. It's usually about a business situation because, something that I do for work is to help people grow their businesses via their messaging and their marketing. So when I'm telling a story, either publicly in my content or, of course, privately to a client, I'll include details about what's happened to me, but usually it's in a business context. But something that we all know and we talk about a lot when it comes to messaging and marketing is one of the best ways to build a platform is to actually, go one step further and talk about what you think personally, talk about how you feel personally, talk about personal stories that have happened to you, which is actually very, very difficult to do. And I have not really done that much in my own content. So I would definitely do that if I wasn't afraid.
What does that feel like when you think about doing it?
It feels expansive, which is always a good sign that that's a yes. Like,
right,
that's a yes. You should do it. But there's always two sides to a coin, right? So there's the expansive side, but there's also there is the side that makes you contract, like there could be consequences for this, right?
Yeah.
There could be consequences for this. But in the context of if you weren't afraid, that would mean it only feels expansive. And I don't think I know what that feels like.
That's an interesting take on that.
Yeah.
In the sense that we need the expansion and the contraction. And so to take the fear out of that entirely would mean that you would be able to, but then
what would that feel like? Only expansion.
Right. Now I'm like lost.
Well, and I think this is great, right? Because you're lost because we live in a world of duality. That's what life on earth is. It's hot and cold, rich and poor. It's dark and light, right?
Yeah.
So we could call this the dark. So it's like imagine doing something and only experiencing the light side. I guess that's what happens when we go to heaven. I don't know.
But I like thinking about, because we talk so much about expansion and all of the positive things that we want to feel. And it's so easy to want to stay in those places. And I've never experienced it before, where thinking about completely removing the fear, how there's a lostness in that expansion.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a different way of bringing in what fear gives us, right?
Yeah, totally. It's a good way of helping to integrate the dark, because let's say we say afraid, fear, well, it is dark side. But that, if we remove that, like that's not there, what would you do if that wasn't there? It's very hard to think about. But then when you do think about it, you can also give thanks to it, because it's like this fear gives context for what I'm doing, Yeah.
So in light of sharing a personal story, I feel like what you're saying probably attaches to some sort of personal story. Is there a space that we could step into with that?
I wonder, because when it comes to sharing personal, like it's personal details and personal opinions and personal points of view, which of course are formed off the back of stories, which are formed off the back of experiences. And yeah, so like that could be a good follow-up question. Like, what is the first kind of like personal story or personal opinion or personal detail that you would share? I don't know.
All right, let's go somewhere else then, because we'll circle back.
Do you get to answer this question too?
I never think about the questions for myself before I ask them.
Do the guests, am I allowed to ask you, or is that out of bounds?
You are, but I want to ask you a question
Okay.
first. This is what we get to do with each other. Okay. I want to explore the bigger opportunities with not being afraid about sharing those stories. What does that actually mean for you?
A lot. So you are one of the very few people that understands this, because you've listened to a lot of my crap.
I don't call it crap.
Yeah, but this is a good time to have this conversation, actually, given what's just happened with the US election and stuff. I think we all know that we're at a very, 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 very pivotal time in Earth's evolution, in humanity's evolution, wherever you sit on global events or what's happening. I think we all know, like, we can all feel how fast things are changing.
Yeah.
First of all, 10 years ago, social media was nothing like it is now, and that all happened within the space of a decade. And now we're seeing the next evolution with AI. ChatGPT comes out in November 2022, I think it was. And then imagine 10 years from now, what will happen with AI. It's unimaginable, really. Just like it was unimaginable 10 years ago what would evolve with social media. So we all know how fast things are moving. And I think we all understand that our actions are leading towards outcomes, for the environment, for humanity, for, everything. And I think if we could all take this approach of working out what we would do if we weren't afraid, I think we would all move into a space where we learn how to master relationships. And I think that is the one thing we need to do to make sure that at the speed we're careening at, that we end up going in a good direction rather than a destructive direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do believe that we're facing this sort of, we're at this precipice now where we almost need to choose. It's not in big decisions like who's going to be the president of the United States. It's more in the smaller decisions of, like, how am I going to handle this person that has triggered me today? And, like, what's that going to mean, the way I handle them, what's that going to mean for them and the rest of their day, and how they, like, it's the butterfly effect, right? And so I think that, like, for me personally, if I do this thing next year, if I start, sharing much more personally content, and therefore, of course, that would evolve into serving in different ways because of that. I believe that I can do my part to help us master relationships. And, if many millions of us can move into that space, then we can have an effect on millions and billions. And then we can, via the butterfly effect, we can move things towards, like, maintaining the environment that humans live in on Earth, Yeah. I think this really is everything, this question. I really do. I think this is really everything, because if we can do that, there's just so much more potential for humanity on Earth. But if we can't do that, I mean, there's potential for humanity on Earth, but I don't really think I like the way that might turn out.
Yeah. I mean, I like how what you're saying isn't about political opinion. It's about creation and destruction.
Yeah.
And I also like that the beginning of the answer is to something that is very tactical. Being able to share more within your content is, like, about, I think, as tactical as you can get with that question, which is what I love about this space that we share with each other, because I tend to have all of these big ideas, and then you bring a knowing and a wisdom around that is always really powerful, I think, for both of us. if I do say so myself. But then you took that and you expanded it into probably the biggest way that we can explore that question. And what I also see here is what I want to go to next is that they're both about relationship. They're both about stories. Relating to someone is of story. It's of meaning. It's of how we share ourselves and how we are able to receive the people in front of us, and know ourselves well enough to be able to do that.
Yeah.
When you think about the relationship between the tactileness or the tacticalness and the bigger context for the question, what other bridges do you see there?
I just think that if we can create more awareness around, what I would just love is if we could understand that what we see out in the world is an actual reflection of what's going on in here. Because when we can do that, that's when we can make our thoughts and our actions and the way we, relate with people tactilely or tangibly, we can make it so much more intentional, and like we can really create on purpose, right? Yeah. So that would be my dream, if people would understand that life isn't happening to you, like you are creating it, and what you're just seeing is a reflection. And you can change the reflection by changing what's here. Most people still don't understand that. Lots of people understand that, but I would say the majority of humans still don't understand that. And when we can get to a place where, even 20% of the 9 billion, 8 billion, however many there are, can understand that, I think we'll be in a really, really, really different place, and we'll be having a much more exciting, expansive, creative, interesting, loving and fun experience on earth. I think we've done dark side and shadow side for quite a long time. It would be so fun to see what's on the light side, much more. It's not that we don't see it, of course we do, lots of it, but we have so much incredible potential. And I just think if everyone was asking themselves this question, what things would we see, revolutionary things like free energy and things that would just completely change the game. So what would you do if you weren't afraid?
Oh gosh,
it's a really hard question.
I know, that's why I gave it to you. Like I said, I was realizing that I hadn't really thought about that question coming into today. And this might almost feel or seem like a non-answer, but it's more of doing what I'm already doing. I am always on the precipice, this is how I feel and experience myself, of just entering into this space of not knowing. Because everything comes from that space of not knowing. And yet, if you are here with us on LinkedIn right now, you are being told that we need the concrete, we need the tangible. And I'm not saying that we don't, but there is a space that you're talking about in a little bit of a different way that I'm talking about, because we all embody this space in our own way of not knowing and being able to lean into that and challenge what is known.
100%. Yeah, I love the way you talk about not knowing. And actually, Nadine has said here, how can we not be sheep? And I think this is the answer. The only reason we act like sheep, right? Humans act like sheep is because we're afraid. And it's and what's the definition of acting like sheep? Well, it's doing what others are doing and doing what others think we should do, because we think that that's the right thing because everyone's doing it, rather than stopping and asking, does this actually vibe with me? Is this actually in my best interest? And it's everything. It's down to all the little things that other things that people are sometimes surprised about me, like, oh, you're not married, you don't have kids,
right,
you don't
right.
like all that kind of stuff. Well, that comes down to making sure you do what you would do if you were not afraid. You know, if I was afraid, I'd probably be married to the wrong person, you know, and that's not fair on either person. I would have just gotten married because, oh, that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
And that's a rabbit hole. It's like, you know.
I'm laughing because I feel like if I wasn't afraid, I would be married. But
Yeah.
that I think that the other piece of this that makes, well, anytime there's a paradox like that, it's worth living into. And one of the things that you said before was understanding that the outside world is a reflection of the inside world and that things aren't happening to us. And I believe that.
Mm.
But I also understand that sometimes it's very important to be able to just own that this thing happened to me.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And that's where this space becomes so enlivened and enriched, and we need more conversations like this where we don't have the box to exist within, because there's no goal here. I don't know what the hell we're going to say in a second, but I just lost my train of thought. See, I shouldn't have tried to think about
well, you know,
what the hell I was saying.
If you're operating from a space of not knowing, then you don't know, do you? Don't even know what your next word is going to be. No, but yeah. I like that concept that I hear you talk about it a lot in your content. This concept of not knowing, and I think that it can sound a bit like gibberish, like right. What is she talking about? But I know what you're talking about. It's coming from this place of we're so conditioned from like tiny little kids at school, via school, you know, exams, did you tick all the boxes? Did you rote learn everything? Do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know, we're taught to know a very specific set of things at school, but what does that mean that we know?
Right.
You know?
I do remember what I was going to say. And it's all around language, right? Because when we start bringing in these big concepts around the reflections that we have, or that the external world is a reflection of the inner world, that things are happening to us, those are really helpful models or tools per se. But as I've learned from actually JJ, every model is broken. And I think that is part of what language is too, is that language allows us to bring all of these things out into the open and to share this openly, plainly. And yet, when we really talk about this question, it is so unique for each one of us. And for me, I feel like a lot of how I'm experiencing the not knowing and what it means to really be in that is so physical lately, that it is not meant to be translated. And yet there is a need to at least translate to some people, like you being my friend and, you know, talking about the physicality of being back in Japan and how my body could feel where I was at before my consciousness could. I was coming at a beach a different way, and my whole body knew that where I was before my mind did.
Yeah.
And some
that's a knowing.
Yeah. And some of the, like, I think that this is the interesting piece about insight, right? Is that insight sometimes is literally just for us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just for you and me. Sometimes it's for this whole audience. Sometimes it's just for you and your family. Mm-hmm. And being able to navigate that as you're building something, because that's the other piece. All of us are here watching this now, not because we're just here to make money and do a bunch of grand shit. Like, we are here because there is something that we are following that we don't know. We are all on the precipice of something
totally
huge.
JJ says all models are wrong, but they can be useful.
Okay, thank you, JJ.
Quote from some person that JJ stole the line from. But it's a really good point, because, you know, take the model of marriage, for example. You know, like, marriage is a tool, it's a technology, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
It works for many people, but it doesn't work for everybody. And when we are sort of like boxed into, you have to do this, it's an expectation, and everyone starts talking about you when you don't do it. Mm-hmm. You know, this is where the fear thing comes in. It's like, well, should I just do it so that I fit in? But it's like, no, I don't It doesn't feel aligned. It doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel like the tool that I should take off the shelf and apply to my life at this time.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like the right thing. And I think we all need to move. If we were all not afraid, we would all move into this space where we could honestly say, you know what, this expectation, this thing that has huge implications and ramifications for my life, it's not the right thing for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then if people on the receiving end of that, i.e. family, friends, society, could be like, oh, okay, we are not afraid enough to accept that and be like, you know what, that's cool. That's that person's discernment.
Yeah.
You know, and like imagine how much more creative we can become when we just accept, okay, in the past, like this model has been the norm, but there's no reason why it has to be the norm.
Yeah.
It's arbitrary. It wasn't arbitrary once. There was a good reason for it once, but now it's become a bit arbitrary, you know.
I'm just feeling like the conclusion here is question everything.
Oh yeah, I mean,
right?
We could probably, all the ultimate questions that you ask, they could probably all lead to that road, like question everything. Because and I think the other thing that we would do if we weren't afraid as well is we would accept that all human beings are so different. You know, we're all so desperate for each other to be the same. Yeah, like we think, oh, humans, we've been obsessed for millennia about like the ideal way to live, and then when someone comes up with their ideal way to live, and they're like, I've found it, it's this, and then they try and they'll wage wars over getting people to agree with them.
Yeah.
And if we can just accept we're all born with these incredibly unique blueprints, just like our fingerprints, you know, just like our fingerprints cannot ever be replicated, neither can the way we move through the world. And our challenge, I think, is to move through the world in a way where we're not afraid to do it.
Right.
Yeah, of course, with discernment and with love and with kindness. You know, that doesn't mean waging wars.
Right.
Right. But, you know, wars come from fear anyway. Yeah, so I think that it's such a revolutionary question.
Yeah. I'm curious to shift it a little bit and ask, what have you done specifically out of fear?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What have I done out of fear? Held back. I think held back for me. So there's actually a lot of things I have done because I've released fear, like little things throughout my life. So things like quitting my job as a journalist at age 25 and moving to Japan. I didn't know any Japanese. I didn't know anyone in Japan. I'd worked, you know, got this journalism degree and worked so hard to become a journalist. You know, I'd worked like my ass off for 2 years, like trying to become a good journalist. And then I had to face the reality that I hated it. I didn't like doing it, which was, that's a reality that you can feel afraid to face. It's like, wow, I'm afraid that I don't like the thing I thought I'd like, and that I spent, you know, 4 years at university learning and, you know, planning for and planning to be. And then I have to face this ego death. Yeah. That's a lot of things that people would be afraid to do. But yeah, moving to Japan for sure was something I did if I wasn't afraid. But in the reverse, what have I not done because I am afraid? Definitely held back. So like, you know, like held back from, you know, like sharing things more openly, which could create a lot more momentum for, you know, like moving more quickly or more precisely in the direction of where I'm going with my business, for example. You know, I can definitely feel that. What about you? What have you not done because you felt afraid?
That is such a good answer.
Yeah. Or what have you done because you felt done or not done because you felt afraid?
Well, I feel like going back to that precipice again, I talk about this a lot with my clients, but it's also because it's what's been so true for me is that there are these constant precipices. Is that a word?
Precipices? Yeah.
Precipice. I
don't know.
I don't know either. Like that's all what an evolution is. And we're moving into this way of looking at business and talking about business in more emergent ways that are evolutionary. And so, yeah, there's I sense that this is hard for me to talk about it in fear, because when we're talking about evolution, it is just the way that it's supposed to be. And I think when we look at fear and being afraid, we assume that something is wrong. And nothing is wrong with whatever edge we're sitting on right now. But I very much feel that I'm sitting on an edge, and it has to do with not just holding back, but there's kind of like, it's like I'm scanning the horizon, and there's all these different things that I can see that are opportunities that are very of me and of the community that I want to serve and create with. And I'm on the verge of taking that giant step. I mean, one of them is considering going all in on the ultimate question, and what would that look like? That's like a really big thing that I'm sitting with right now.
And what are you afraid of that makes you not jump straight into it?
I recognize in myself that I have all of these ideas, and to commit to one, there's a limitation, or there's a limiting factor in that for me, or that's what it feels like. And some of the work that it would take to actually build an audience, there's some things there that I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do that. I want to do this. All of these comments that are going, I mean, there is something happening here. And when I touch into that energy, it's clear. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack with that.
And I mean, I think we have to acknowledge a lot that, one of the beautiful tools of the world is money, right? And like money causes a lot of fear. So like if I bring myself back to this question again and answer it differently than I did the first time, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Like literally, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Okay. Imagine just getting up and just doing whatever the hell you wanted all day, every day in your life. Why doesn't everyone do that? Well, because we're afraid that we won't be able to earn money.
Right.
And keep our heads above water if we do that. But like, that's something I would do if I wasn't afraid. And it doesn't mean it doesn't mean I resent money or I don't like earning money. That's not the case. But I have to acknowledge that, why don't I just get up every day and just do whatever the hell I want? Well, it is because I'm afraid of like not having the resources, the money and the resources to run my life, right? Yeah. So I think that one's pretty huge.
Yeah, and there's so many different layers to that question too. Yeah.
I think a lot of the times, and this is especially prevalent in the work I do, especially if I'm working with someone who's in, let's say this is a really common situation. They're in a, like a great job. They've got a great job, but they've got this desire to be like start a business, to quit that job and start the business, but they're afraid.
Right.
And it's like, what are you afraid of? So this comes back to that sub question that you asked, what have you done or not done because you've been afraid, right? And they'll say, oh, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to make it in business, which usually means I'm not going to be able to earn enough money, which means I'm not going to be able to support my life, right? Which means I'm going to have to return back to work, right? So yeah, like this is actually a question I often have to ask them. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Let's just pretend you couldn't fail. That's another sort of spin on the question. What would you do if you couldn't fail?
Yeah. The other thing I like about how you just drew that out is we have to look at the construct of the life that we're living, because so much of that construct isn't intentional.
Well, we didn't create the construction from scratch.
Right. And I think, with the way that you live, also the way that I live, I think that there's definite aspects of, I don't know, I'd have to like really pick through my life to see where all of those constructs are, but also where I've broken them. Because another part of this question is, what have you done that other people would absolutely be petrified of, and how right that felt? Moving to Japan was one of those things for me. I just like you, I didn't know the language. I didn't know anything. Nobody really understood. I didn't understand. And that's the other piece here is that understanding is not necessarily central to this question. It is like that bodily push, that clear calling. I'm hesitant to call it a calling. I mean, that's just one way that we can assign language to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny talking about broken models as well, because language is a model.
Right.
And isn't it, having been in Japan, you understand like how many words they have that describe a specific thing that English doesn't have.
Right.
And it's like, that's such a great example of models that are broken, even though we can say, oh, well, the English language is perfect, but it's always evolving, right? Because there's always things missing. And like, when we learn another language, we're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that English doesn't have a proper word for. Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, and JJ's got a good one here. What would happen if doing what we wanted was actually awesome and could make money?
And it totally can.
Yeah.
It absolutely can. Yeah.
I also think that like a kind of different spin on what JJ's saying there is looking at what we're afraid of doing and then asking ourselves, well, what if it could just really be good?
Right.
Like we go straight for the fear.
Yeah, we go straight for what could be wrong. Exactly. Our brains always keeping us safe.
Yeah.
But then stunting our expansion.
What could just be good for you?
In what context?
I don't know. Just like going back to thinking about your business, thinking about 2025 and some of the fear that you have around that and where you've been holding yourself back. And when you think about like, well, what if it could just be good? What comes up for you?
Just literally sharing absolutely everything that I would want to share without worrying about, oh, is this person going to be able to understand it? Are they going to be able to receive it? Are they going to think I'm totally weird, like a total wacko? Like some of my like big, far-ranging, far expansive ideas, I tend to not, unless it's, I tend to not go there with like clients, because it's like, let's just keep it relevant. Let's just keep it on point. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh man, but if they understood this concept,
right,
like we could take this really, really far. So it would just be like sharing that in an uninhibited way and like not being afraid that they're going to not understand me and therefore not want to work with me, or going to judge me and therefore not want to work with me, and like just have that feeling of like, oh, it's not working.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm thinking about your content, and please go check out Celia's content because it's pretty great.
Well, if you want to grow your business, it's pretty great.
Well, that's very true.
It could get better.
But
it could get a lot better.
But what's interesting is like, I don't look at your content and think, actually, we don't even have to talk about your content. Let's look at something that's already happened about 20 minutes ago when you were sharing the bigger context of the question. And while it wasn't directly a personal story, it was the way that you saw the world. It was your seeing that allowed us to come into this idea of what it means to relate as humans and how that's the antidote to the destruction that so many of us feel we're heading towards. And that is of perspective, your perspective. And so in so many ways, and maybe I'm super biased because I know you like too well to be able to separate you from how we show up together versus how I think that you're feeling some of this within your business. But maybe this is good for all of us to think about, in the sense that the shift that I'm actually taking this very to heart as I'm saying this, the shift that we need to make, when other people look at it, it's far smaller than what we feel about it. And it's because of that goddamn fear.
Yeah, that's it. What a great answer to this question. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Be big. Be big. Be seen.
Makes me want to sit up taller.
Be bold. But be loud with things that are game changing. Yeah. Without the fear of, oh, they won't understand, oh, they'll think I'm crazy, oh, they just won't get it. Right. People don't get me. These stories, which of course then if you tell them, you're going to see them reflected. Right. Right. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Tell better stories. So I can get a better reflection.
Yeah.
not tell fear-based stories.
And I would add to that of my slant would be to feel more deeply.
Yeah.
You know,
Everyone. What would you
it's-
do if you weren't afraid? Feel more deeply. But
it
you're
is-
already good at feeling deeply.
I know, but my gosh, I feel like these last 2 months have been a crash course in actually letting myself feel. I mean, I have just been absolutely ripped open.
But you do that better than anyone I know.
Oh my God.
Better than anyone I know.
Well, thank you, but
Mm.
it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. That was the thing I was thinking about actually yesterday, is that this whole idea of what we want to create, I think a lot of times we view that as a protection. If I create this thing, that I will have what I want and I will feel good.
Right.
But when we actually look at what it means to create, there is destruction in creation, and creation is never about protection. You need the safety and stability to be able to truly create what is coming through you. And now we got to talk about feeling. And my gosh, that feeling is intense. But that's all part of it. And so kind of going back to the idea of fear and allowing that to be an expansive space that we step into, and not just deeming it.
Or like, how's
sad.
this for an answer? What would you do if you weren't afraid? Feel fear.
Ooh, nice spin.
That's a bit of a meta answer, isn't
Shit,
it?
yeah. I like that.
Because, yeah, so many people are afraid, but they're subconsciously afraid, and they're afraid to consciously acknowledge and feel their fear.
Mm.
That's a really meta kind of like potentially cancelling the whole thing out kind of an answer.
Well, it's perfect because we've got that. That's the perfect place to kind of segue into wrapping this up. And what I want to do with that is, as you sit with this conversation, I'm curious if there's been another question that has emerged for you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a long body?
I have no idea.
Why are you know what? You're a seat giant. You've got a long body. I feel short next to you.
Is that your question?
No.
What
length is your torso?
What's besides that, what else has emerged for you in the form of a question? I like starting with a question and sending with a question.
I would like to ask you what you would do if you thought you couldn't fail. If you knew you couldn't fail.
I would just unabashedly be me. Probably would have sworn more during this thing.
Yeah. Said more swear words.
Yeah, I don't know. I love my failures too.
Oh.
I'm really in a space where I'm looking back on the things that have been hard to look at of myself and recognizing the importance of them, and just being okay with it.
Yeah.
And then cycling back into questioning them.
Yeah.
Because that's how it goes. So yeah, I think being more aware of those cycles, leaning into them, loving myself. I feel like I'm pretty good at loving other people.
Yeah.
But and also understanding that love that we have is also of receiving. You know, I think that that's the other piece about your reflection to the rest of the world, is we forget to look at how we create that also by being willing to receive.
Oh my gosh, that's another great answer to this. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Receive love. Receive.
Yeah, just receive.
Receive. You know how many times, like, I notice it so much now. You know, I will give someone a compliment, or I will like thank them in a really like genuine way, and it feels really awkward. I will feel their awkwardness when they don't receive it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, they didn't receive that. Like they don't agree with me, or they don't know how to hold that. It's really discombobulating.
Yeah.
You know? Like it's really discombobulating. Like even when you say something, 2 words, like I remember I said these 2 simple words to someone recently when they did something for me. I said, I appreciate you.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh.
Oh.
And I was like, oh. Oh.
Well, I like the idea of switching that O to ah and appreciating you.
I appreciate you.
And appreciating everyone here. I'm really looking forward to going through everybody's comments. We've been kind of seeing them as they've come in. And I also want to welcome all of you to connect further with Celia at her website, messagetaincome.com. I love that. I mean, she's amazing. You are amazing. You have helped me see things in business that have skyrocketed me forward.
Oh, and ditto.
In very different ways.
I received that compliment with deep gratitude.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And if you haven't already, definitely sign up for my newsletter, the reframenewsletter.com, and never miss a power of a single question, both within the ultimate question, but beyond. There's other stuff that I share there as well. So thank you all for being here. And yeah, I guess this is over and out for now. We'll have a little bit of a break. We're going to kick off the ultimate question again in January. And I'm going to be sitting with what does it mean to go all in on this? So if you have insights, reflections that you want to share, definitely reach out to me. I would absolutely love to hear from you. So lastly, Celia, thank you for coming all the way to Berlin for this. This isn't why you came, but
just for you.
Basically. Right. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.